So welcome everybody, all the Brazilians and Betty, plus everybody's there. So I'm presenting today part of my dissertation. I'm gonna touch on all the subjects, but not as much in two chapters. So I'll focus on the two first ones. I changed a little bit the title for this presentation, which is Saving the Rainforest: Experience of Being, Acting, Fundraising as NGOs in the Brazilian Amazon. So today I'll give a special focus to fundraising, which is one of my chapters. So can I minimize this as well? Or should I move it around?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Go into the more. Go into the more. I think there's a way to hide the video count or hide the floating meeting controls. I think that was it.
Yes. So I think it's important to say from where I'm standing, looking at this work. Yes. So as a female Brazilian, I'm an environmental manager. I worked in the Amazon before I came here, and it's definitely one of my passions. When I came here, I came with this background of working from NGOs, but I wanted to see this world from another perspective and with a little bit of distance. But I know that during these 5+ years that I've been doing, that I've done my PhD, I navigated these two roles as a researcher and as a practitioner. So every time I went back to Brazil, I was always working. I always done some kind of consulting and kept in touch with the NGOs. And also this insider-outsider perspective. Sometimes, depending on who I was talking, I was more viewed as an insider in terms of the NGO. With others, I was the outsider researcher. So I've been navigating these two roles, which doesn't make it easy, but I'll really try in my work to give voice to the people that I've talked to. And so my work is in the Brazilian Amazon. The Brazilian Amazon is one of the most important places where conservation and development tensions exist every day, and is a place with transnational attention to the conservation of the rainforest, and is a place where we're approaching a tipping point of deforestation that might have major changes in terms of the whole climate, but also biodiversity conservation and the livelihoods of people living in the Amazon. So it's a place where the deforestation is a wicked problem, and there's different actors in the Amazon trying to deal with this, and two ones that are trying to save the Amazon are NGOs and funders, which are the focus of my work. So what do we know about NGOs in the Amazon and NGOs in Brazil? So they came in what's called the third wave of environmentalism in Brazil around the 90s. Most of the NGOs in the Amazon were created around this area, but some was prior and a few others came later. And this was a moment of professionalization of environmentalism. So they are very much professional organizations with management structures, and they work a lot with projects. So some people call it ecology of results. So it's very result-based. It's not just activism alone. Also, it depends. It varies. So they also quite vary. And they work with diverse types of approaches and tools and strategies, but we really don't know what it is that they exactly, because NGOs is this big concept of organizations that are trying to portray as the spectrum that some authors use, from grassroots movement organizations to transnational activism. So some of them are very grassroots. There is this concept of social movement organization that is kind of in between NGOs. So NGOs can be very along this. And then funny thing about non-governmental organizations that they are defined by what they are not. So they are not government, or as in the US, we call non-profit. So they're not from profit. But what NGOs really mean is really hard. So they can be sometimes used interchangeably with social movements, sometimes not. I've heard people saying even as some kind of entrepreneurship. So there's not a lot of clarity, and that's this is a gap that I'm trying to show here, trying to bring attention to what it actually means to be an NGO working in the Amazon. I don't say that I have a final answer, but I'm really trying to put a concept forward of what NGOs are, and I hope I'll get you there. So my dissertation had the overall question of how the social environmental NGOs navigate the dynamics of conservation development in the Amazon. I'm not going to go to the specific questions, but I'm just trying to understand this big, massive research framework that I've created. I don't think I can explain everything, but just to say that what I'm looking here is, what I look in my dissertation is mainly what is in this dash square, which is, I'm trying to understand NGOs' organizational culture defined by identity, their identity and framing and communication practices, and how they navigate between getting outside of their own organizational boundary to interact with others. So in terms of fundraising and collaboration, and also I've looked at learning, how learning happens in this process, in their internal process as well as their process of NGOs interaction. And I'm focusing this because this is important to this part, which is what actually NGOs do. And we have research done a lot about the strategies and tools that they do, but we don't look behind the scenes of what NGOs actually are. So that's what I'm trying to look, bringing this argument that if we have a better nuance and better view on this, we can actually understand how complicated it is and how much it's not easy to actually get to the big impact of controlled deforestation and the socio-ecological benefits. And there's a lot of contextual factors that can limit or enable. So I talked with NGOs in 2017 and in 2020 and 2021, last year. And a lot of things changed. So Bolsonaro government was a big thing, and he had actually had a campaign against NGOs, so they're just really trying to survive. So this was a topic that keeps coming, and it was not a focus specific of my dissertation, but I recognized and tried to address. And also the pandemic and all the changes, those were also important topics that influence. So the context as well influence what NGOs are and what they do. And just to explain my main chapter, so the one is about social environmental NGOs, trying to explain how they do framing and what are their identities. So and the second one is how they access funds. So I'm looking, and I talked to some funders as well and trying to address the funders NGO relationship. The fourth one is about collaboration among NGOs and with other stakeholders. And the last one is about intra and interorganizational learning. And I developed like this idea of how I navigated as an interdisciplinary ecology student and a TCD student, how I'm navigating this, what I'm calling this knowledge landscape. So I've worked mostly around boundaries and trying to explore the edge effect between the different disciplines that come from each of my 4 chapters. So I look at social movement, and I brought some social movement theories to try to understand NGOs. I look at conservation and development to talk about funding, the concepts of cross-boundary collaboration and collaboration advantages to talk about collaboration, and the concepts of social learning and organizational learning to try to understand how NGOs interact. And they all came from multiple disciplines and in the environmental studies, environmental science area. So I pull from a lot and take many classes during the years to try to bring this together to explore this edge effect. And today I'm going to try to talk more about how some of these effects between the chapters that I've seen in my work. And also, I went beyond this literature knowledge that I got with my research and with the practical knowledge of the people, perspectives, and experiences that I've interviewed. And also the idea is that this will also come back, that I can keep discussing with the NGOs and improving this, and using also as a reflection tool for NGOs to think about who they are and how they interact, collaborate, and learn together. So I've used a multi-method qualitative analysis. It's kind of like a interwoven of threads that I've done using this concept of geography. So it comes from the ethnography of NGOs. I use narrative research to analyze my data, as well as participatory action research that I've been engaged with some of the NGOs that are part of my work. And I use a mix of participatory observation, in-depth interview, online survey, and I use thematic analysis and social network analysis and one case study to look at this. So just I'll go quickly to this. I look at NGO websites and reports. I've interviewed in person and online, and I have a core sample of NGO and a bigger sample plus funders and some coordinators of networks that I've talked. And I've used an online survey of RECAN, which is this network that I'm part of, as part of this participatory action research. So it's an NGO, it's a network that was created in 2003. And now me and Bob, my advisor, are the facilitators of this. There's a group of 15 NGOs, so it's very NGO center. There's 2 universities, 2 funders, 1 government project and 1 private foundation, but actually the government and the private foundation are not super active. And it was created in the beginning to discuss municipal environmental governance, but it has changed over the years. And even before pandemic times, we already use a lot of webinars as a space to integrate and share. And so this is also the place that I want to bring back this dissertation. So most of the NGOs were are part of my core sample or my big sample, but I can talk about this later. So then to understand a little bit the meaning of NGOs, what it means to be an NGO in the Brazilian Amazon, I look at framing. So framing is this idea of how groups interpret and make meaning out of what they do. So any social movement, they develop collective action frames to explain what is wrong in the world and how they want to make changes. So it's all about their own interpretation. So depending on where you come, you can interpret the different social problem as one way or another. So those are the framing process that NGOs is kind of like the lenses that we're looking. And this is a little bit more, it's a more dynamic feature. I think that's important for you to remember that this can change with the context and with people and with a lot of things. But the collective identity is the sense of witness, like what brings us together, which sometimes are not even so expressed in words, but it can be expressed in cultural materials, from the logos to the practices that organizations have that bring them together. And it can be a feature of groups, but also of movements. So there is also an identity of the environmental movement, or in Brazil, the social environmental movement. And it can be considered a double-edged sword. So if your identity is super strong, it actually, you create a boundary and a barrier that it can be too strong for you to interact with others. So there is a sense of we versus that can be problematic. And this is I'm treating as a more stable feature of NGO. So what I found in my research in terms of framing practices and purposes is that NGOs have 4 main practices of framing. So they frame the conservation development problem in different ways. They frame their own mission and goal statement. So mission needs to be the short thing that says a lot of things, or don't say a lot because it's too big. But each NGOs have different goals, and also their repertoire. So their strategies, tools, and solutions that they use, as well as the results and success. But they also do all of this with different purposes. So I found 3 main purposes. One is for public recognition, outreach, mobilization, special to really, it can be from the local level to try to mobilize the local society, if it's a more local NGO, to big topics and outreach. This is like trying to get this Brazilian society to get into the saving the rainforest mindset and support, and also to access media and develop narratives. There's also positioning. So if there's a big issue that they need to position themselves individually as a group, mining, whatever is the big problem of the moment, fire, they also do framing to do that. And lastly, for fundraising and resource mobilization, which connects to what I'll talk later. So they also, how they frame what they want to get money to do their work. And that's an especially interesting purpose of framing. But that tells you a little bit of what NGOs are. I think the most interesting when we look at the sources of identity. So what actually makes NGOs who they are. So I found 6 sources of identities that together define NGOs. So is their thematic expertise, approach, and capacities. So different NGOs have different thematic expertise. So they work with more one issue or different issues, and they express a lot about this. Where they are in terms of territorial location and coverage. So if they are more local level or more Amazon or which region they are. So some of them are very connected to a state or to a basin or to a protected area. For example, another thing that really helps define NGO is who they work with. So there's a lot of NGOs that we are the NGO that work with indigenous people, and also the kind of partners and partnerships that they develop. The origins and history, so where they came from. So a lot of them were created in the 90s, but other came before, and some of them came from the academia, some came out from social movement demand. So the kind of the myth of where they were originated, it's important to explain who they are, as well as their leadership and team composition. So how the NGO is being, who is in the front. A lot of NGOs are actually known for the person who's in front of the NGO or for the team and how it's managed, and who, so if it's NGO of more forest engineers, of more biologists, or more of a mix, that's also important, as well as the organizational structure, management, and teamwork. So how they work together and how the structure is more centralized or more diffuse decision making. So each of those can be also another spectrum from the NGOs that are more information production or more advocacy, local or Amazon level. So all of this, they can vary. And if you consider like a multi-spectrum, a mix of multi-spectrums, they can be placed in each of those. And what that tells is that NGOs are very complex and multidimensional organizations, and they have diverse positionalities. And a lot of times while talking with them, they really like to make a point of what makes them unique and different from others. And even though they are all NGOs working out, so I think this is an example of a quote. The person is talking, I don't think it's unique, but one of the few organizations that try to make this entire journey from information from its primary production to scientific verification until it gets to the last consequence. So I think we are one of the few that produce and try to get the information. Like their approach is quite unique. And he even says there are other organizations that are better in doing one thing or the other, but we are the only one that actually do all of this. So it's an interesting, and they use a lot of the expression their DNA. So this is our DNA, which is I think is also quite interesting. But even though they're quite diverse and unique, they're all part of this bigger movement of the social environmental movement, social environmental NGOs. So I was trying to get where is the collective identity of NGOs, and I found some also sources that bring them together. So in the end, they all came indeed from the civil society. They have similar goals, values, and struggles. Even then, if you really get close, there's a lot of things that divide them. In the end, they are also really trying to get to the same purpose. And in Brazil specifically, and I've been talking with other people recently about NGOs in other regions in Latin America, and in Brazil, this idea of social and environmental together is very strong, especially in the Amazon. And they all are working, even though some of them came more from conservation, they also nowadays work with social and environmental issues together. And they do have a professional structure and management. And they work a lot of time as mediators. Doesn't mean that they are mediating process all the time, but they're also in between, is trying to bring, for example, academia and graduates together, or a company in a region that is doing something they're trying to mediate. So they're always kind of in this in-between space of bringing people to dialogue and to deal with environmental issues. And it was very funny. Then I was looking back at my 2017 interviews, and someone was like, explain to me why my research is important, I feel. And he was saying, like, when you ask us from NGOs about the institution, we talk a lot about how of what we are doing. But one of the things that I think is important is to register the why. Is the why that motivates people, is the why that brings you to the agenda and that keep you in the agenda. So it's really important to understand this why and really look at them of each NGO is very individual, and why and how they work behind the scenes is as important as what they do in their agendas. And besides that, funding is core of the NGO's identity, and they don't exist without money. And it's always a topic that I didn't even expect to work when I started, and it just kept coming to me, and I was like, okay, let's address it. And it's not a lot, it's not has been studied a lot, but there's one study from the Gotthard Foundation that later was picked up by the World Bank and Jeff to analyze funding from the for the flows to the Amazon. And this is specifically from their studies on looking at NGOs and where the sources of money come. So most of money NGO come from bilateral. So for example, USAID, and bilateral together with multilateral form the official donation. And foundations is the second source, and foundation is especially important for NGOs. And we'll talk more about this. And foundations together with NGOs form what is called philanthropy. And there's a little bit of money come from private sector looking at this study. And that's it. And what I've looked then is to look at my sample of NGOs, and I listed all the funders that they had in the past years, and I found over 300 different funders. This study was looking at 49, and those are like the big green people that are giving money to conservation. But what I found is that there's a broad, diverse subset of funders that I definitely didn't expect to find that many. And it's very interesting, some of the NGOs, especially bigger ones like IP and ISA, you can see from the social network analysis that they have a lot of funders that only they have. And they do share big, like BNDES, Fundo Amazônia, it's a big funder, and a lot of people receive from. But they also have a lot of their own. So it's a lot of social capital that they have to have all these people. And it can be small money, and they don't come only from the big foundations. They can come from small donations of local private sector to other types of philanthropic money. And that's very interesting. This is what is showing, like the size is the popularity, so the amount of size that they have. So we have the popularity of NGOs, which are the squares, and the circles are some of the big funders. So BNDES, the Norway Embassy, CLUA, and Moore Foundation, which are big philanthropic, international philanthropic, ICS, which is a new philanthropic foundation in Brazil. So they are here, but there's all this diversity. So it's way broader than what we talked before. And what I've looked at, in the end, NGOs depend on project-based funding. That's how it works. There's in Brazil, like direct donations have started, like little campaigns to fundraise, but it's not really it's a little bit of money that they get, but they really depend on project-based funding, and which is not easy. And I look at the funders grant giving versus the NGOs fundraising. So NGOs get funding from the official donation that is usually called. So that's what it usually is, but there is exception to all of this. And usually official donation come from call of proposal, that you send a proposal, and different, and depending on which bilateral, multilateral organization, they like to do consortiums because they're giving big money. So they want to usually have awardee and sub-awardees. So there's always this issue of bringing different organizations together to work in a project. And in philanthropy, from all that I've talked, they don't do call for proposal, and they don't accept unsolicited proposal, but they're actively seeking partners. So they have people in the field looking and doing a lot of, I talk with officers that like, my life is to talk to people. That's what I do. And I try to find what are the needs and projects. And that's how they co-develop, they try to co-develop projects with the NGOs. And some of them talk about preferring to do separated projects. They think NGOs are stronger when they receive the money and manage the money from their own. Doesn't mean that they are trying to incentivize collaboration, but they prefer to give money separate. But again, there's exceptions to that. And NGOs, they do look for funding opportunities and call for proposals. They're always looking for that and respond to those call proposals, but they also are trying to present, they go after some funders and present their strategies to try to develop ideas together. A lot of them develop this long-term relationship with certain funders, like they're historic funders that give them money from since they started, so that this always has giving them money. So a lot of them have this important long-term relationship. And it's very interesting. They have started a lot, and I was also not expecting that much. A lot of partnership with private sector. So private sector money seems to be growing. I don't know about amount, but they did appear in the social network analysis also as different kind of private sectors that they've been working with. And I'm using to talk about this as a metaphor that a person talked to me about. It's called the dancing around the project market. It's called o bailado do mercado de projeto, which is this dance they always been discussing. There's two main issues in this: the amount of money and also the time frame. So NGOs want more money and more time, and funders want to give less money, depending on level. They're trying to control the budget as well as wanting results in a short term. And we know that this is hard. It's really hard, and it has really a lot of limitations in terms of long-term change, because what happened in this dance around that sometimes the funder are pushing the NGOs to their directions, but NGOs want to do other things. So they're always dancing to figure this out. And what happened is that NGOs need to sell short-term projects with the silver, but like unreal silver bullet. That's I promise to control to the deforestation in this area by 10% in a year. It's impossible, but they do, and we all know that it is, but we continue talking about it in this way. And a funder brought this to me, and I actually did not expect, they were saying there is a lack of honest conversation. That's the truth. We're talking about this, but it's just all imaginary, makeshift things that we're gonna do. We need to be more honest about it. And this is like part of what they were saying, like there are no honest conversation. Donors need to be educated that you have to deal with a dishonest government. You can pretend you're believing, and the guy pretends he's believing, and everybody pretends it's working, and soon the official data is out and it's all wrong. But it's not for anyone. It's not for something that anyone can face. I at least have few relationships with people I know I can talk to, and what they're going to talk about back to what they really think. There's only a few people that they can actually develop this honest conversation, because it is like this: they have the money, the NGOs want the money, and they all develop this relationship that is not the most honest one. And that's something that we definitely need to talk more and reflect about, and maybe try to change. There's some people in philanthropy trying to change this for sure. And also what I found is that NGOs are constantly looking for more autonomy. So they do apply for the bilateral and the big money, but they are really trying to find some kind of funders and develop these relationships that actually happened before, when they worked here in the 90s of, I support you and your organization and you can do what you want. Because we know that the context in the Amazon is quite dynamic, and it's hard to predict all you want to do in a year, and it takes some time for projects to be approved. So they are constantly seeking for this money that give them, or even some of them have been talking about selling products, like developing shops to sell products that the communities are working, and they get part of this. One talk about developing an endowment. So they're also looking for different financial ways to get money that doesn't come from philanthropy and from official donation. And they have the most diverse type of management, what someone called the management engineer, but architecture of different strategies to try to diversify money. So they want to do one thing that is not a trend topic right now. So they get money from this project to this. They try to make the best with whatever they have. So it's their strategy to try to survive and keep getting money and doing what they want. So that's the issue. It's kind of like their way to try to to dance to their own beat in this market project dance, But in the end, this issue of fundraising has a lot of implications for collaboration and learning, which are my other two topics. And especially looking at collaboration, I've looked at different partnerships and networks that NGOs are involved in for more, I'm calling more interconnected and more autonomy, different types of partnerships. I'm not gonna get into too much in this, but what I found in this process of partnering and getting outside of your own boundary to connect with others, there's a lot of this balance between competition and collaboration. So funding is limited, and sometimes depending, for example, if there is a call for proposal, they're asking for a consortium, they can have, and more than one people talk to me about this idea of this marriage of convenience. So we get together to do this project, each one does their part of the project, but like the emergent property of this holistic thing is not happening. Their own work in their own niches. And so that's not a true collaboration, right? It's a partnership, but you're not actually exchanging and building on each other. Each one is doing their part. But sometimes there is really interesting types of collaboration that come from complementarity of teams and territories. So it's more when it's complementary, not as much when they're overlapping. So if you work in the same region, not necessarily it's gonna have, but if I work in this region and you work in this region, we might work better together than actually if we all work in the same region. But there's a little bit of this clash of the sources of identities here. And in terms of network, NGOs participating in diverse networks. I'm not going to focus too much on that, but it's interesting that participating in a network that is also again another bit of a clash between the individuality of the NGO versus a network that have their own identity. So again, networks have logos and mission statements. So you need to get outside a little bit of this in your own little world to participate on networks. And that is not easy. And there's a lot of practical constraints. Everybody says that they love participating in networks, they want to do it, but time and money and the practical issues of the day-to-day get into it. And this very much connect to the project market again. Projects don't pay for you to participate in network. Your time to participate in collaborating in network is usually not accounted in any project. So NGOs do whatever is the pressing issue of the moment. They are so busy with whatever they need to do, and with the Bolsonaro attacking them and a pandemic and so many things that is very hard. But some of them work better than others. And I talked to some network facilitators, and the success, some of them mentioned some aspects that they think that make the network successful. And it's very interesting that they seem to work better when there's this role of the boundary spanner. So someone that is connecting the different organizations. So the network have their own little management, and someone that really try to bring people together and create the conversations. And that's basically their whole life. At least the people that I've talked to, they only do this. This is their job, just to always trying to this. And some of them, for example, mentioned it works when we keep the individuality, and I'm the one doing this, and including I'm the one doing fundraising. So I'm not expecting the NGOs to do fundraising. I do the fundraising, and I like you do this part, and I divide it. Like it's a little centralized, but there's also a more horizontal structure in terms of how the work is done. So this gives them they don't need to worry about the money, so they can actually do the work together, and also developing trust and have long-term relationships. So the having having resource and networks to operate is important, as well as have this type of facilitators. And in this process also, this is in the terms of collaboration, the influences of collaboration. And in terms of learning, when I talked to in my interviews, people brought a lot of very interesting lessons learned in terms of how they adapt and improve their conservation development practices. And it's basically how we've learned over the years to navigate the project market, as well as in their developing partnerships with communities, governments, universities, and other NGOs. And there's a lot of learning by doing. And they experiment, doesn't work, and they talk a lot about this in terms of mistake avoidance and learning from failure. And they really show a mature and nuanced view on their projects, on their roles and interactions. But the thing is, it's a lot of individual learning. The problem with learning in NGO is hard to make it collective. And if those person that learned something very valuable in a project moves somewhere else, this kind of get lost, and you kind of like need to relearn. So learning happens, it's very important, but it's very limited in NGOs. Again, nobody pay you to learn. You don't have time to stop and reflect. And I can say that for myself, right? I came here to reflect because when I was working NGO, I had zero time to really stop and think about my work. You're just doing. And I really like this aha, and one learned that someone was mentioned as an example. For example, another thing that bothers is this thing about projects. We call the hummingbird project. That thing of going there and kiss the flower and go away and then never more come back or come back later to make a diagnosis. But there is really no interesting committee to the community. We didn't want to repeat that. So the done those in the past, they don't want to do it again. So it's not about creating dependence on the NGO. This is an important debate. It's not us understanding that there is a necessity to have an organization or several organizations that give the support to this different community moment in the life of this community. So dependence is like a lot of reflection on dependence, on learning, on trying to do better. This really happens. And they, for example, have moments that they bring the communities and discuss like the project. And so it's a very interesting process and some of them seem to do better than others. And one space where learning has been incentivized is in the Recon network that I participate. And since before UF is a part, and we developed some capacity building that I participated as a participant before, and trying to have this moment of reflection with the individuals that work in NGOs. So we had like capacity building with 3 models, going different places in the Amazon and discussing. And that's very interesting because it created connection between the people in the different NGOs. So I exchange a lot of my learning, and even like after the courses, we kept talking about and exchanging and sending information, even if our NGO the directors don't really get along and the NGO have issues. So the personal connection that was created is because learning collective can be very powerful. That can keep even if people move from other organizations, and also independently of big issues that might exist in the organizational level. But again, Recon lost. It was very interesting for a while when we had a project really work, but now there's no really funding, and we've been like doing one thing here and there. We have a WhatsApp group that people send messages, but without support for learning, it's very hard to maintain this as a process. And some of the people that was in this photo, for example, in the courses are not even in their NGOs anymore. So this has definitely been a challenge to keep learning together. And as I said, learning is more intrinsic and passive, and there are structural and cultural limitations to make more explicit and collective. So funder support and having those boundaries as well as in this process of learning together, it's important to move beyond dialogue. They talk a lot about learning in their moments of internal dialogue, but to actual documentation and doing more internal evaluation and systematizing their experience to put it in paper so that doesn't get lost. As well as this is important to register your learning because it also helps you to share it. So it's not just something that you're talking here and there with people. So giving priority to learning is an important aspect that has been overlooked for sure in the NGOs role. And I've talked a lot. And this is like probably 70% or even less of my dissertation, but so what of all of this, if you can learn get something out of this, is that in this big context, funding is for sure important, and it was more important than I even thought. It definitely influenced how the NGOs navigate getting out of their own boundary to navigate with others. And what my research has shown, that NGOs face multiple diversities and limitations. So the dancing around the project market is definitely one of the biggest things for them that limits to make it actual changes, because they have all this organization and things to work with and all this fundraising. But they seem to be very resilient organizations. Some of them that I talk almost closed their door many times, and sometimes they work with one subject that funders don't want to fund anymore, and they don't get funding for a while. But they seem to keep wanting, because I guess the why that the person talked before still exists, right? So they really try to keep it up. And in the end, they have consolidated a social environmental movement in the Amazon. It's a more professionalized movement for sure, but it's formed by these nuanced and heterogeneous organizations that operate in the complex system. And they have differences, but there's a lot of things that keep them together and keep them working. And in terms of implications from my work, I brought interdisciplinary and cross-team direct contributions. I think I gave some little contributions here and there in each of the topics, but in the end, to have this, bringing these different disciplines together to look at this complex beings that are NGOs, and bringing this more nuanced view of NGOs to better analyze their work. And there is still a need, I guess, from a deep ethnography and with more funders. I've talked with a few funders, and I have folded things from my interviews that I haven't used because it was outside of the scope of my research question. But there's also a lot of reflection and learning happening in the funders that, if I have time one day to look more, this can continue and talking to more. I would love to talk more with funders. I've learned a lot from talking to them and systematizing. There's basically very little research on that. And I also want to go back and validate and do my joint reflection with NGOs to discuss more, especially the project marketing and their implications for learning and collaboration. So that was it for today. Many thanks to everybody, people who are here, people who are there, and for SNIE and TCD. TCD is this amazing community that I'm very happy to be part of. I'm leaving in 2 days. It was not a very wise decision to make a presentation in the middle of it, but here we are. And also I want to thank the GIA project that has helped me, has some research assistants, and my family, which I think is there as well. And your friends, thank you so much. Very